Okay, so you guys have already completed an activity going through the stages of meiosis. So we're just going to talk about that very quickly and briefly. And then we're going to go on to the important stuff like why we have genetic variation. So meiosis is a form of cell division in which the number of chromosomes is half from the parent cell, which means a parent cell, aka your regular cells, are diploid or 2N, having a full set of chromosomes. In humans, that's 46 chromosomes, 23 pairs. Of those, we have one set of sex chromosomes, an X and a Y, X being for female, Y being for males, and you have the other 22 pairs being autosomal chromosomes. Meiosis only occurs in our bodies within our sex cells, for males in the sperm and for females in the egg. The process of meiosis is to make sure that the homologous chromosomes are separated to form haploid cells. And actually meiosis 1 and meiosis 2 are the two different types. Meiosis 1, we still see a separation of those chromosomes, but we have a diploid cell at the end, which we only have two of. Those two diploid cells will go through meiosis 2, and they will form 4 haploid cells. Now, you guys went through the 4 stages of meiosis 1 and the 4 stages of meiosis 2. Note, P-match, prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase is going through this again. A little misconception. In telophase, the cell does not divide. The cytoplasm is divided up and nuclear envelopes start to reform. It is in cytokinesis that a cell is actually divided, not in telophase. The rest of the steps are similar to mitosis. So let's compare these. In mitosis, you are still repairing, growing, and going through an asexual reproduction for the most part for all your cells. The cells that are produced in mitosis are genetically identical to the cell that it started with. And all cells are diploid, or carrying a full set of genetic information, exactly like the cell that divided. Meiosis is a little different though. Cells are only made through sex cells in this. You don't have your regular cells going through meiosis. And with this, you only produce haploid or 4 genetically different cells. So that means you might have a full set of chromosomes in the first cell that you start with, but you only have half of that information. The haploid cells are considered to be genetically different. And the reason that they're genetically different from the parents is you will have chromosomes that will have dominant and recessive traits. In your haploid egg or sperm that are produced, you might only pass on a dominant trait to one and a recessive trait to the next, giving genetic variation. It's important to understand that these cells are genetically different from the cell that it started from because they only have half the genetic information. This is also why, if you look in the mirror, you don't look exactly like your mom or your dad. You might have qualities of both your mom or your dad, or you don't look like either one of your parents. And you might look like a grandparent or a cousin, or maybe your siblings look alike. So an example of this is my sister. I have 2 of them. One of them is the same height as me. We have very similar features and builds. And if you had a room of 100 people, you could go, oh, that's her sister. My other sister is 5'8". She has really, really dark brown hair, really dark brown eyes, and she looks nothing like me. She looks exactly like both of my parents. I don't look like my parents. My mom is 5'2". My dad is 5'8". I don't have any of the same qualities as my mom or dad, except for my mom's hazel eyes. I look, though, exactly like my mother's mom. I look like my grandma. And that's just how it works. Sometimes those traits are not expressed in one generation, but expressed in the next. So you might be the only person in your family that has red hair. That's okay. That's because that was a recessive trait that was passed on. Or you might have 2 parents with brown eyes and you have blue eyes. Again, a recessive trait that was not shown in your parents that is passed on. So in meiosis, remember that the cells are genetically different from the original cell because they only contain half the information. And that's important for genetic variation, which we'll talk about later. So So now we're going on to genetic variation. So this is a part that I really do want to talk about. There's 4 key concepts that contribute to genetic variation. It's crossing over, independent assortment, and random fertilization. These are 3 major things that make sure that we have genetically diverse populations. Without these 3 contributors, we would have a lot of people looking exactly the same, which means our species might not survive. And so let's talk about crossing over. Now we're going to do an activity next week on crossing over. In crossing over, this happens in prophase 1. Note, it happens only in prophase 1 of meiosis. When the chromosomes are lining up along the equator, we're going to see that we have a little bit of a crossing over at the bottoms of the chromosomes. When they're touching at the bottom there, they're actually going to switch the bottom legs of the chromatids, and they're going to switch that genetic information with the homologous chromosomes pairs. This can only happen in meiosis 1. The other one is independent assortment. This happens during metaphase 1, where the homologous chromosomes are lined up along the equator, and the 2 pairs of chromosomes will either go one way or the next. Now, if we can see this, it's going to be kind of an independent distribution of these homologous chromosomes so that the genes or the gametes can go to different ones. This is also why, no matter how many times your body goes through this, you're not going to see the same chromosomes in the same cells. So you might see that your parents might have multiple children, and you might have similar characteristics, but you might not look alike at all. So this is the reason, independent assortment. So you have this independent kind of shuffling of the cards of your genes, and then random fertilization. Basically, when you have your gametes, which are your egg and sperm, they are going to randomly fertilize to make a zygote. A zygote is a fertilized egg. So for us, when we start talking about these random fertilizations, it's basically a race. The sperm that gets to the egg the first and fertilizes it is the winner. And the egg will typically not allow more than 1 sperm to come into the egg. There is a possibility. This is why twins can occur sometimes. But we don't know which one's going to go. It's kind of like the roll of the dice. You don't know what dice is going to pop up each time. And so with this genetic variation, it allows for a random fertilization, so you have more than 1 possibility for your outcomes. In fact, if we look there, we will have about 7 trillion different possible combinations. And so this is also explaining why I have 4 siblings, and you can honestly, we have the same mannerisms, but me and my little sister, she is the one that looks like me. I don't look like my other 2 siblings at all. And so you can see that there's genetic variation, and it's okay to have that. That gives more genetic diversity to a population itself.